In the East Midlands, cleaner air for our cities plans to crack down on polluting vehicles and bring in more green transport.
The price of freeing our cities from air pollution, is it worth paying to invest in electric?
And what happens when the hairdressers who never vote went to Westminster to meet their MP?
Simplify it a little bit more for us, definitely, and just speak as a normal person would, rather than using all the fancy words what no one understands.
Hello, I'm Mari Ashby, and my guests this week, two politicians whose seats could disappear under boundary changes, but sitting comfortably in our studio for now. Pauline Latham is the Conservative MP for Mid Derbyshire, and Vernon Coker is Labour's MP for Gedling. Welcome to you both. First, a delegation of East Midlands businesses and politicians will be in Shanghai this week, and the idea is to make new contacts and sell the region to the Chinese market. It follows the news this week that the East Midlands has seen the second lowest growth in wages in the country. So, Pauline Latham, this trip to China is being organised by the Midlands Engine. It sounds like they've got quite a big job on their hands here if they want to improve our economy. That news on wages is bad news.
Well, obviously, we'd all like wages to be higher, but actually this investment in going into China is going to be good news for the whole region. And in fact, Derby has a lot of trade with China. I think it's worth £4.5 billion a year into Derbyshire. So that's really good. We need to build on that. And certainly in our area, we've got John Forkin from Marketing Derby and some of his team, and the university are going, and the councils. And I think that's really good news to go and promote Derbyshire. It's got a lot to offer, but we need to promote the whole of the East Midlands to be able to bring people in to invest in this area. And that's really important for the whole region, particularly after the Brexit vote. We need to stimulate that and make sure that we're working hard to bring wages up.
Vernon Coker, we may be lagging behind in the East Midlands on the wages front, but nationally it's the joint biggest rise since the financial crisis.
Well, I think, first of all, I think it's a really good idea and very supportive of the concept of the Midlands engine going out to China. In the context in which we're in post-Brexit, in this world as we move to wherever we're going to end up as a country, it's important that we fight for investment, that we go out there and sell ourselves. It's not just going to come into the East Midlands just because we think it's a good place. We have to sell it. The Chinese are looking for places to invest. We've got big companies here, Bombardier, Rolls-Royce, JCB, as well as a plethora of medium and small businesses. And the plea I'd make, and I think it's important, that as well as those big industries, we need to see what we can do for the medium and small businesses as well.
How much of a difference could it make to our economy?
Well, it can make a huge difference, because if we can sell to China, which is an enormous market and growing, and other countries as well. We need to go through the whole world, not just China, but that's a really important market. It will bring money into the region, and companies like, as you say, the small and medium size, like Royal Crown Derby, they can go out there and sell their wares. But it takes time. You have to build on these relationships. You can't just go in and say, I'm going to sell this, you buy it, we go home. It takes a long time to build up the relationships.
Yeah.
The other thing, just to say very quickly, is that we shouldn't forget the huge number of students that come into higher education into our region, and to continue that is really important to our local economy as well.
OK. It is. Now, two of our cities have been told to bring in restrictions on vehicles to cut down on air pollution. The clean air zones will be introduced in Nottingham and Derby, which are in danger of failing to meet European standards on air quality. Now, as our political editor Tony Rowe reports, there's a big push to encourage more environmentally friendly travel to tackle the problem.
A glimpse of the future, or a wrong turn which could hit business.
It's very smooth, very easy to drive. It's fully automatic. As you can hear, there's a little bit of rolling noise, a bit of wind noise, but you can't hear anything from the engine at all.
Nottingham City Council is promoting electric cars, using them in the council's fleet and building charging points across the city.
I think the main benefit for the city is going to be reduced emissions. Nottingham has an air quality problem along with many other cities. Electric cars means that there's no emissions at source.
And it's not just cars. This is one of 13 new electric buses on the streets of Nottingham from tomorrow. It gives the city the largest electric bus fleet in Europe. And it's quite an investment at 300 grand a bus.
Soon they'll be able to drive along here, Britain's first electrical vehicle only lane. Nottingham and Derby are among 6 cities the government's ordered to cut down on air pollution to comply with European targets on air quality. They'll get a clean air zone where low emission vehicles will have priority, and high emission commercial vehicles like buses, HGVs and vans could be banned or face a charge.
Now, this is something that's being driven by government. It's not being driven necessarily by us. We are supportive of it done in the right way, and we're supportive of the idea of controlling car usage, controlling certain types of high emissions vehicles, but more importantly, prioritising and incentivising low carbon vehicles.
The project in Nottingham and Derby is being backed by £6 million of government money. Critics say it's more cash for costly green policies.
The amount of subsidies that are going into fighting climate change, we're subsidising wind farms, we're subsidising the backup gas-fired capacity, we're now subsidising power points to connect our electric cars. I've got no problem with electric cars and power points if they're commercially viable. The point is they're not commercially viable, otherwise the local authority wouldn't be having to subsidise them.
Environmentalists say the plans don't go far enough and all cities should follow Nottingham's lead. Campaigners claim the government had planned to include 10 other city clean air zones, including Leicester, but dropped the idea after objections from the Treasury. It may be a glimpse of the future, but it's not a vision everyone agrees with.
Well, joining us now is Kat Bürtger from the Green Party here in the East Midlands. Hi, Kat. Well, this emphasis on improving air quality in Nottingham and Derby, that's got to be good news, hasn't it?
Absolutely. I don't think this is going far enough. But we are facing climate change, and also air pollution is a huge health issue for all of us. It's about estimated over 50,000 people die a year down to air pollution in the UK.
The government, of course, would say that air quality is improving in this country. In fact, since 2011, it's spent £2 billion on greener transport.
Well, that's fair enough. It's not enough, nowhere near. 2013, Leicester was 9th and Nottingham 11th of the worst cities in Europe regarding air pollution. I don't think that's good enough.
OK, Pauline Latham, it's not good enough.
No, I mean, we can always do more, but we have to do it incrementally because we can't afford to do it as a big bang. So we have to make improvements all the time. And I'm very pleased that Derby is going to start tackling the poor quality air in the city, and obviously Nottingham as well.
Of course, the big criticism of this is that it's only for 6 cities. You know, that's not going far enough.
6 cities at the moment, but once they sort themselves out, there'll probably be another 6 cities and another 6 cities on that. You can't do everything at once. The country just doesn't have enough money at the moment, but people can make a change themselves.
Is that what this is all about? We can't actually take it any further because there isn't enough money? Because that's what Client Earth are saying, aren't they? That's why the Treasury didn't expand this project and include Leicester, for example.
Well, that will be one of the reasons, because we don't have limitless money. It would be great if we did, but we don't. So we have to do it a bit at a time and to improve each city as we go forward and tackle the worst first.
Isn't that fair?
I see exactly the opposite. I don't think we can afford, also economically speaking, to wait much longer. Climate change is very costly. We see floods and so on and so forth. And also, this is a huge strain on the NHS. A lot of people with asthma and other allergic reactions are putting a strain on our NHS. So, and it's very short-term thinking. We need to think long-term and do as much as possible because we can't afford to wait much longer.
What should be done on this, Vernon Coker?
Well, first of all, I think it's really exciting step forward on the part of both the city and the county councils here in Nottinghamshire. I think it really is, and there are other authorities like Derby and others that are making that step forward as well. Of course, we always want to see more, and we need to accelerate that process and the progress that's being made. But electric buses, electric cars, eco-expressways, all of those things that are happening, as well as the change to individual patterns of transport, I think are really exciting. And we just, all of us, have to say how can we do this much more quickly than we are doing at present.
We have to, but isn't there a worry here that restricting things like HGVs and vans in city centres, that could have a knock-on damaging effect on economic growth?
Well, there's always a balance to be made between economic growth and climate change, and that's, for some of us, we would say, of course there's a need for a balance, but doing nothing is not an option for our country and for our communities. So of course we need economic growth, of course we need the ability to move goods around, but we can also change a lot of the things that we do locally and indeed regionally and nationally and indeed internationally to actually ensure that we make sure that we don't do damage to our climate either.
Like what?
Well, you're seeing it with the electric cars, you're seeing it with the electrification that's coming of the Midland Main Line, you're seeing it with some of the other proposals that are being being made around HS2 and so on and so on. So there are plans that are being made. The point I make is how all of us accelerate that progress.
Everybody can do their bit. It doesn't have to be just councils and government. Individuals can do their bit as well.
It's very difficult. Electric cars, for example, are very expensive still.
At the moment.
Yes, and they're getting cheaper, and I'm glad that they're getting cheaper, but it's not really an option for most people.
And there aren't any restrictions on private cars as such at the moment, are there, either?
No, because
bus
that would
services
restrict business.
have been cut in Nottinghamshire. You know, this is a real problem for people. So we do need to, as politicians, do changes. And there needs to be a cultural change as well, that people are just simply more using public transport. And that, sadly, needs to be done by some enforcement and finances, so that it becomes expensive using a car.
So what should we do to try and restrict that?
Well, I think we should have car-free zones in the inner city, and we should charge people who come in with cars, so it becomes cheaper to use the bus.
Is that the way we should be going, Vernon Coker?
Well, the council here have already used the workplace parking levy, which was actually quite controversial. Well, in fact, it was very controversial at the time. But there's a choice here for people. You cannot not do anything. And so what the council are trying to do, and what authorities across our region are trying to do, is how you balance economic growth, how you ensure people can move around, but at the same time recognise we have to do something about emissions, we have to do something about climate change, and these are very difficult balances to be made, but it's not impossible, and there is progress being made.
Well, Kat Burke has said earlier, Pauline Latham, that the figures show that air pollution causes 40,000 deaths a year. That's an enormous figure, and Therese Coffey, your Environment Minister, says that the real progress is being made, but there's still an awful lot more to be done.
Well, there is
She
real
admits
progress.
that.
Well, there is real progress made, but we need to get on with it. And I do believe that councils are beginning to tackle it, but you can't damage business, because if we damage business, we don't have any money to spend on anything. So we've got to do it so that it works for everybody, and we have to make sure that the worst vehicles are tackled first.
The diesel cars, for example?
Yes, and a lot of the vehicles that are coming into cities, the large HGVs, the big companies have already started to tackle it. It's the smaller companies, and you can't damage those smaller companies too quickly. You've got to give them, you can't just do sticks, you could do carrots as well.
It is the wrong way around. We really can't afford to not do something about it. And for example, looking at alternative green sources of energy, that would give us a good industrial kind of basis and a growth. We know fossil fuel, for example, worldwide produces, solar worldwide produces more jobs than the entire fossil fuel industry put together. So if we were to have a proper transition to clean energy, that would economically also stimulate our country
greatly. That's part of the broader picture.
Yes.
OK, Kat Burke, thank you very much for joining us in the studio. Next, how do we bridge a growing gap between voters and the politicians they elect? It's a question that's become more urgent since the referendum debate, which revealed a large part of the electorate, particularly in parts of the East Midlands, is feeling alienated and left behind. Our political reporter Peter Saull has taken two hairdressers who say politicians are out of touch down to Westminster to meet their MP.
For one day only, a political rally with everyone in Notts batting for the same side. There were 45 events throughout the Palace of Westminster. In the Speaker's words, Nottingham in Parliament Day really was a first. But it wasn't just local dignitaries who descended on the capital. Emma, on my right, had never voted before the EU referendum. So, in an effort to close the gap between the East Midlands and Parliament, we arranged for them to meet their MP for the first time.
What do you think we can do to change the way politics is?
Simplify it a little bit more for us, definitely, and just speak as a normal person would, rather than using all the fancy words what no one understands.
It's so confusing. You hear all these different opinions. It's just so hard to understand, to take it all in, to be honest. It's easier just to sit on the fence or just to not have an opinion at all.
We invent a language that it locks people out of the whole thing, and it makes this sort of disconnect between politicians and people even wider apart.
Like all hairdressers, these two spend their days talking to customers, but politics is one topic of conversation they'd rather avoid.
People just get angry straight away and get on the high horse and start arguing against themselves. Me and Sarah's probably a bit like, oh, calm down.
We are from Ashfield. Yeah. This is the first time we've seen you, met you. If the people ask you to do things, we want you to work hard for us to do it.
And I promise you that I will do that.
For now at least, they feel closer to the democratic process. Nottingham may have come to Parliament this week, but to many back home, this place still seems a million miles away.
Now, Vernon Coker, you played a big role in this Nottingham in Parliament Day, as we're about to see. But what will it mean for the average voter? How will it help them?
Well, I think what it's trying to do is to make Parliament real to people. I mean, the process is what the problem is, as much as the language and the feeling of remoteness from political decision making. As even the hairdressers were saying there, everybody's interested in politics. People have an opinion, they'll argue about it, they debate it, they discuss it. But it's this sense in which, well, what difference does it make? And I think part of what Nottingham in Parliament Day was about, and on the other days that other cities and regions are organising, but we did our Nottingham, which went really, really well, was about saying to people, you can get involved and it does make a difference. We had students from Nottingham Trent University and debating social mobility, and that's why I've got a pink tie, because they were pink. They were a pink team, but they got involved, and it became accessible to them. It became real to them,
and that's
the real challenge, I think. Yes.
Yeah. And Peter's report showed that big disconnect really between Westminster and ordinary voters, as we saw in Emma and Sarah. How do we bridge that gap?
Well, I'm trying very hard to persuade as many schools as possible to come and use the education programme in Parliament, and it's beginning to pay off because many of the schools in my patch actually do come. But I'm also hosting a series of Meet Your MP events in the constituency, and the recent one, I had somebody come up and said, I've voted for 40 odd years, I've never met an MP, and I'm really pleased to have met you. So that's working.
Wow.
But of course it's quite
40
hard.
40 years and never met an MP?
Never met an MP, and that's difficult. I think today's MPs are actually out and about far more than those of yesteryear.
Is it the language you're speaking that's the problem? Because that's certainly what Emma and Sarah told Gloria De Piero. They don't feel that politicians speak their language, and you don't express things plainly enough for the ordinary person.
Well, I hope I do, because I don't know any long words, so I try to use words that people do understand, because I think that is important. I think people do feel that we're all too posh, and that's just not the way most people would speak. So yes, we probably have to speak in a more ordinary way. But I still think there are ways we can go out and about and meet people. The more people that meet their MP, which I think is very important, the more people will realise that we're real people just doing a different job.
Is it a reaction to austerity, do you think?
I don't think it's austerity. I think this is something that's been a long time coming. The trouble is, as politicians now, particularly female politicians, since the death of Jo Cox, I feel much more vulnerable going out and about, and so I am more cautious maybe than I used to be, and that's a terrible sadness that somebody dies and then we all start to feel worried about where we can go, and that maybe I don't know about men whether they feel that as well, but I certainly feel more vulnerable than I used to.
Certainly, I'm sure some of your female colleagues have spoken about that, Vernon.
Oh, that's definitely true.
But this is a problem, isn't it, for Labour as well? We heard, didn't we, in Peter's report there, that Sarah, that was the first time she'd ever voted, was in the EU referendum, and yet there they are in Sutton, in Ashfield, and that's Labour heartland territory, surely?
Yeah, well, absolutely, and Gloria, in my view, is an excellent MP. But it does go back to the point. People are interested in politics. If you're debating immigration, or you're debating Europe, or you're debating that, what the problem is, which is expressed in a way, politicians are remote, politicians are part of an elite, and they're out of touch. I think it's this sense in which people want to know, how does my opinion actually get into the political system and make that difference? And that's what I think the political system as a whole is struggling with, and I think we all need to consider how we do it.
That's about voting, isn't it?
Well, it's not just about voting, because I think what people are saying is that just by voting, they're not sure how much difference that makes. It's the sense in which, how do I influence what's going on? Not just at election time, but all the time in between as well.
Thank you very much. Well, there's that serious side in the Nottingham Parliament Day, but it wasn't all hard work and policy discussions. Here's Vernon having a game of cricket on the green, and quite a good catch from the Nottingham East MP, Chris Leslie. And our favourite, of course, the Beast of Bolsover, Dennis Skinner, putting away a well-placed penalty, and just for balance, he missed one too. Oh, let's hope I get this right. Coker caught Leslie, naught.
I think it was a first ball as well, I think.
Not a bad catch.
Golden duck, I think.
Not a bad penalty either for 84-year-old
No, it's
Dennis
amazing. It's
Skinner.
amazing, I think. And somebody will sign him up if he carries on like that, I think. No, it was a great day, though.
But there was obviously the serious
serious
side too.
side too, yeah.
45 events were held throughout the day and some very high-level seminars. What do you think it achieved?
Well, I think what we were just talking about is making Parliament relevant to everybody.
Yeah.
But I think it was the breadth of the people that came. So you had students, you had captains of industry, you had restaurant, Zach Baines came down. You had
Michelin-starred restaurateur.
Exactly.
Couldn't get into
Derby
that
man.
event.
No,
I
exactly.
tried.
You couldn't. But it was from industry to civic society to politicians to citizens. All of them came down, and the big thing was for all of them to come together and to get a common sense of purpose about how we would do more, obviously for Nottingham and Nottinghamshire, but our region as a whole as well. I think that was the big sort of thing. And the important thing, I think, Murray, is as well, is that how do we make sure that we use this as a springboard and not just a day we all reflect on and say, this was brilliant, what a great time we had, and how do we move on from that so it really does make a difference.
Should other cities be following in Nottingham's footsteps?
We've had a Derbyshire Food Day for a number of years.
But that was much smaller scale, wasn't it?
It was much smaller. But it worked really well. We had a lot of people visit it. But yes, I think what Nottinghamshire did is a really good idea, and I'm sure there'll be other counties and cities who will decide to go down that route. Certainly something I'd like to look for Derby and Derbyshire to have a day promoting itself in Parliament.
So, and the media. To be fair, we often sort of did, but to be fair to the media, the media did reported it really well in a sensible way.
Thank you very much.
As well.
We'll take that one. Thanks, Vernon. Time now for a roundup of some of the other political stories from the East Midlands this week. Here's Tony with 60 seconds.
MPs from all sides have paid tribute to the Grantham and Stamford MP Nick Bowles, who's revealed he's being treated for cancer for the second time. In a tweet announcing that he had a tumour in his head, he joked that the critics might think it explains some of his recent behaviour. In Strasbourg, the East Midlands Labour MEP Glenys Wilmot criticised the British government's handling of Brexit.
The reality is Britain's future prosperity depends on having sensible negotiations with other EU countries, not the chaos some would advocate. Membership of the single market, on which many jobs depend, is surely crucial for our economy.
East Midlands Airport has announced that it has plans for a major expansion. The airport wants to double passenger numbers and triple the amount of freight it handles. There'll be a shortage of Christmas cheer in Derby this year. The City Council's decided not to stage a big switch on for its Christmas lights. The council says cuts means it can't afford the event.
Our best wishes to Nick Bowles as he begins his treatment, and thanks to Pauline Latham and Vernon Coker for being my guests this week. Next week we'll be taking a closer look at those plans for a big expansion in traffic at East Midlands Airport. Now back to Andrew Neil.